Alright, we have finished stitching all of the edges. I've done applique stitch all the way around every block and every edge. So you should be able to, move your mat around and it won't come apart. So we can just set the mat aside for right now and grab, if you are doing the Carpark, which I believe everyone is, because that's the main part of the pattern, grab your Carpark pieces. You should have a main and a lining. And then we can also grab some double-sided interfacing because we're going to add some interfacing. So I'm going to grab my pressing mat and my iron, and I'm going to grab some interfacing, and we'll come right back. While my iron is heating up, I'm going to cut a piece of double-sided, the fusible interfacing. I have some scraps from my other pieces, so I figured I'd try to use them up. So we want to put this double-sided interfacing on one of the pieces. My main and my lining are the same here. So I'm just pressing this down. Okay, so I do need to do a little bit of piecing here with my interfacing. So just fuse that first part, and then I'm going to cut this off. I mean, if you're cutting, if you're doing a full strip, you're not using scraps, then you don't have to do any of this. I just wanted to use up some of the scraps I had left over. Figured why cut out more from the bolt. Okay. And I just need a tiny square over here. And we want to leave, let that cool a little bit. So we have one that's really firm and crisp, and the other one is just fabric. All right, so once we've done that, we can peel the paper backing off of the piece, and we can remove our iron. We don't need it anymore. So let's peel the paper backing off. And what we're going to do is place the main Carpark and the Carpark lining with our right sides together. And we're going to stitch two of the short edges and one of the long edges. So we're going to clip this into place. Okay, so we are stitching up the Carpark. So we're just going to go around the edges here. And we want to stitch it a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like everything else we've been doing. When we get to the corners, we're going to pivot. And I find if you've used the double-sided interfacing, it's easier to go through your machine with double-sided interfacing, touching the feed dogs and not touching the presser foot. So the shiny side should be down. It'll just feed through your machine a lot better, a lot smoother than if it was the other way around. Unless you have a walking foot on your machine. That's the only exception, I would say. So that's why I've put the double-sided interfacing down. Okay. to reduce the bulk and to keep the points nice and crisp for turning. Once you've done that, you can turn the Carpark right sides out. So let's do that. You can grab a pokey stick or a chopstick or something like that to poke out the corners, make them nice and crisp. And so we want to carefully just roll the seams on the edge so that the seam line is directly in the middle. And then next we're going to press and fuse the fabric lining to the fabric main. So that's why getting this lined up perfectly really matters. Nice and crisp. So that when we go to fuse it, perfectly lined up. And this is just a really stable piece of fabric. So you can begin pressing, but this is going to fuse the double-sided interfacing to the lining. It's going to fuse everything together. So, get everything nice and crisp, as nice and crisp as possible before pressing, because once you've pressed, you're not going to be able to adjust it because it's going to be glued down. And it might take a good deal pressing before the two layers fuse together. So just be patient, it'll come together. Well, this little road trip fabric that I am using, I just think it's so fun. If you haven't figured it out from my accent, I am USA based. So I just love that the states are represented and they've got little symbols for each state. It's just really fun. Alright, once you feel confident that these two pieces are glued together, and we can move on. Wonderful. It's nice and crisp. It should be very firm and stable. Making sure that the pieces are aligned and everything's great, we now need to transfer stitch lines to the Carpark. So if you have your pattern piece, you'll notice these lines that are on the pattern. Now obviously when we cut this fabric, it was on the fold. Okay, so the lines are here and here. So we need to transfer those lines, those markings. So if you have tailor's chalk, I think the easiest way to transfer the marking is to fold the pattern piece so that you can see the line. Folded edge aligned here. And I'm just gonna use that as a guide. Okay, and then, so we've got that line, and now we can draw the next line. So fold that over. So we know that's aligned there, got that. So we can draw the next line here, and then do the same thing, the other side. Lined up with the fold. And you do want to put a line on the fold, I would say. So you're going to have different pockets. And then that last one, line it up. Okay, so once you've transferred all of your markings, the next thing that we're going to do is we're gonna place the car park onto the road with the right sides facing up, matching the pattern markings, and with the raw edge of the car park matching the raw edge of the road base. Okay, so let me clear my iron out and my pressing mat and I'll show you all of this. So I've got my car mat, my road, with my little housing edge over here and my raw edge here with no corner. So we're gonna place the car park with the marked side up and the raw edge touching, just like I have it. So raw edge here and raw edge of the road here. And the back of the car park will still be open, and the middle mark on the car park pattern piece is at the fold line. So we already did that. Now we're going to stitch each line so that it's secure. So we need to line everything up here just so. We want this to be at the edge. To be at the edge. So the edge should touch the edge here. We're going to line this up on the pin it. We're just going to pin it into place. And then we're going to pin the other side into place. So I think that'll be the next easiest place to pin. And then the middle marking should be in the middle of this area. So let's pin that down in the middle. And if you're not sure what the middle is, we can bring the two sides of the mat together and just find the middle on the road. So, yep, that is the middle there. You also probably have a marking on your pattern, on your road if you transferred it. So let's put some pins in there. And then next we're gonna put this next marking down. Pin that down. And then we're going to pin the final marking down here. So these pockets are going to be bumpy to hold the cars in them. Okay, so we're going to stitch. You can kind of lay everything out now that it's been pinned. Just check that it generally seems to be pinned correctly. So now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch down the pattern marking pieces down these lines to adhere the fabric to the road. So we want to make sure as we stitch these lines down that we do a lot of back stitching, because we just want to make sure that as your kids are pulling the cars in and out, that everything is secure. So you can't have too many back stitches really as you go. Especially at the top and bottom. That's where it's going to see the most wear and tear. I mean, the bottom is going to get covered by edging, so really it's the top up here. Just stitch a bunch of back stitches, okay? We're going to move on to the next marking. Okay, let's move on to the next marking. And on some of these, your pockets, your car park pockets, might overlap blocks a little bit. That's okay. That's quite all right. Right, and I'm on to the last section here. Okay, so we have affixed all of our pockets for the Carpark, but what we need to do next is finish off the pockets in a way that's almost like making a box pleat. So you're gonna fold this down, fold the edge down here, and then we can clip or pin it in place. So you kind of just like fold the extra fabric down on top of itself almost to get it to fit into the area. I think clips work a little bit better here because you're going through so much fabric density. So the pocket still pops up, but it's kind of clipped down into place. And it can be clipped about a 1/2 inch or less from the stitch lines here, kind of how big you want your pockets to be. And we can stick a clip in the middle here too, if we want to. And you shouldn't be messing with the size of the road fabric underneath. Like the road should be perfectly nice and taut. Like as you can see, it's just flat. The only thing that you should be clipping in here and making the box pleat out of is the top fabric, the pocket, to make the pocket. If you are jumbling the road fabric, then you're doing something wrong. Should only be pleating this pocket. And that's just to make it the same length as the road. We're on the final pocket here. Okay, so you should have 4 little pockets that we have clipped together. Now what we're going to do is stitch the bottom part, so where we've clipped everything, bottom part of the Carpark in place using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you stitch over the folds, back stitch over them a bunch of times to keep the pockets into place. So let's do that. We're stitching the box pleats for the pockets on the Carpark bottom, and we're doing this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And when we go over a fold, just back stitch over it a couple of times. That'll help keep it in place. Then keep going. All right, good job. Yay, we've made the Carpark. Now, what we're going to be doing is tracing road lines onto the road parts of our mat. So if you have disappearing ink or a disappearing ink pen or a tailor's chalk, a light color ideally because you are going to be writing on black, we're going to draw a line down the center of all of the roads. We're going to use this line as a guide for our stitching. So you could also use a fabric marker to paint the road lines, or if you have a Cricut or Silhouette, die cutting machine, you could cut out little vinyl pieces and iron them on. So you do not have to stitch these lines onto the road by hand if you don't want to. You could paint them instead. So just giving you options here. But what I recommend is that you take your tailor's chalk and you just draw straight up and down your roads, the lines where you want your stitching or your paint or your iron-on vinyl. Whatever method you are using for transferring road lines, these are still going to serve as a guide. So if you want to be really precise about it, you can grab a ruler just so that these are drawn right in the middle, but you don't have to do that. Okay? Once you're happy with your lines, now obviously I haven't done them all, but we will be using a straight stitch on the roads to stitch the road lines here, and we'll be using white embroidery floss. So grab an embroidery needle and grab some white embroidery floss, or whatever color you want to do. If you want to do yellow or something instead, that's fine. So we just want to tie a knot on the end of the thread. And then because this is attached to a ball, I do have to cut a chunk off here. So I'm just gonna cut a chunk of thread off, embroidery floss. And then we're gonna use the needle. We're gonna thread the needle with the embroidery floss. And we're gonna insert the needle from the wrong side of the mat. And we're gonna pull the thread to the right side. And then we're gonna push our needle down about 1/2 inch away, pulling the thread all the way through. And then we're gonna push it in. And then this will create some space between the stitch, and we're just gonna keep going. So if you know fancy embroidery stitches or things like that, like you can do a back stitch. If you know how to do that, you can paint the road lines on. There are so many things you can do here, but you're just gonna keep going and going and going, all right? And you're gonna repeat the road lines all the way around the car mat.